Copilot, Copilot Studio environments. Season 2, episode 1 is available on our YouTube channel. Please head over to youtube.com. I think it's Copilot Zero to Hero, or head over to copilot0tohero.co.za, and the recording is not there. Or is it? I haven't updated the link on the website. But you can get to the YouTube channel by clicking on any of Season 1's recordings, and you'll actually see a playlist that says Season 1, and then obviously Season 2 has the video from 2 weeks ago. I encourage you to understand what type of agent you can build, because it also influences where you build things, right? So today's session, we're going to focus on Copilot Studio environments and getting your tenant ready for building agents. Remember, this is all about agents. I will not be touching on Foundry when it comes to tenant readiness, because Foundries bring your own everything, and that actually lives in Azure, and it functions autonomously outside of your traditional Copilot experience. You're going to build your own Copilot if you go build things in Foundry. Between Karika and Jackie, they're going to have to tell me if we can connect Foundry to Copilot. I think you can connect it via an MCP if you built a Copilot agent and connect it to your own language model and functions that live inside of Foundry. I think that is completely doable. But we are going to be focusing on what you need to do from a Microsoft 365 perspective, and also from a Power Platform perspective, because these things get managed in different areas. And I'm going to take you through some fundamental principles around, well, they don't call it the Copilot control system anymore, but what you need to think about from a governance perspective when you start talking in the language of Jackie and Karika that actually live inside a Power Platform. Because strangely enough, Copilot Studio started off as Power Virtual Agents before it got rebranded to Copilot Studio. So if you ever built a chatbot, that's where all of this started. Now, thanks Tracy, I'm going to start sharing my desktop, and I'm going to give people options into how you would like the slide deck presented. Option 1 is a very clean sort of, for those that live in South Africa, choreographed experience going through the slides. And if you want to see this, use a thumbs up, or would you prefer to go back to the Blade Runner Cyberpunk 2077 experience? You have the option to choose what these slides actually look like. Is that the first one with the thumbs up? What's that, Karika?
Second one for me. I like that.
This is the second one. This is the first one.
Yes.
Casper's wanting the first one. HP is saying the second one. Anyone else want to weigh in on? So that's 2 for 2, people. 2 for 2. First one. So you don't like these cool slides, these ones? No. All right. So we're going to go with this one. Oh, no. I'm going to give up. Karika, which one would you like to see?
Well, I like the neon one. I'm a 90s baby.
This one. Okay. Well, we're going with that. We will share both slide decks with everyone. And then you can go look at this. Where is the start? There we go. You can go spend time looking into all of these things, and you'll get it. We'll put it into our GitHub repo, because we have a GitHub repo where most slides go to live and die. And you're welcome to download this. It's also in the frequently asked questions section of the site, copilot0tohero.co.za. That's one word, Copilot0tohero. All right, so let's start talking about Copilot Studio environments and why, before you start building things, your environment design actually matters, right? There's a whole bunch of security stuff and things to consider, right? So why would it matter? Anyone want to take a stab on why your design environment would matter? And Jackie likes building solutions in Power Platforms, so managed environments and all of those things. Any takers? And I'll show you. Governance, yes, absolutely, in capital letters, bold. And mistakes are very expensive. So when we look at why it matters, without the right environment model, things end up in the wrong space. Now, from a publishing perspective, and this is one of the problems that, well, maybe Jackie and Karika can answer this. If I build an agent in my dev environment, how difficult is it to publish it to my production environment from a Power Platform perspective? I suppose that would be my biggest question. Is it a managed solution that needs to be packaged and then somehow published?
Yeah, if it's a solution, you can export and import, or you can use pipelines.
Pipelines. So from an environment perspective, when you look at orchestration, and understand this, if you're a maker, well, you wouldn't necessarily worry about the governance. Someone else would worry about that. You just want to build agents. So it's important to understand what these environments are like, and go speak to IT and get them to talk about it. So you might find that in a dev environment, you have more controls than you have in a production environment. Things like roles, regions as well, and we'll talk about regions in a bit. And then also from a lifecycle management, in very much the same way, cheers, Trace, in very much the same way that you approach development, quality assurance testing, and production, you need to take the same approach when you start looking at building agents in your environment. And yes, Microsoft is massively at fault here because they don't lead with governance, they lead with consumption. They want you to build agents. So the path of least resistance is someone with an M365 Copilot license goes into Copilot chat experience and they click on the agent builder thing on the left and they build a me agent. And then they want to share it with friends and it doesn't translate that well because of some sort of security controls. Or you start building it in your default environment in Copilot Studio, and then IT comes back to you and says, there's no governance plan for this, you can't publish that specific agent. Now, when Microsoft built the platform, they didn't have any of those controls in. However, over the last 2026, let's call it 2026, they've built a bunch of governance controls, and they've also built additional licenses that you need to throw at a problem if you are going to want to manage agents inside of your environment. And I'll show you what that looks like for the highly technical people on the call. So also, why you want to do this, the risk if you don't do it, what our approach and what the slide deck is going to talk about from an approach perspective, because the outcome is so that not only can you build safe agents in your environment, but when business requests agentic functions, a retrieval task, autonomous agent builds, you at least have the right guardrails in place, and it doesn't take a month of Sundays to release an agent because every time you build one, it doesn't have the necessary security guardrails. So let's start at the top. Let's look at defining what an environment is, because if you can't define what an environment is, how are you going to know what environments need to be? So it's vitally important that you understand when we talk about Copilot Studio and dare I say, agentic environments, you need to understand, and if you've got Power Platform people, they'll be able to explain it better because they've had to live in these environments or how they built. Jackie, how long has that solutions and managed environments been around for in Power Platform? I mean, you built stuff, I think it was the end of last year, the last time we spoke about
it hasn't
been
long. It's been about a year or so.
All right, so it fits into the same, because everything lives in Power Platform, mostly, and we'll talk about when it lives in Power Platform and when it doesn't. The same way that a solution gets packaged from a Power Platform perspective, from a Power Automate and a Power Apps. I don't know how Power BI things, they have workspaces and things like that. But the way it gets packaged, you can apply the same foundational principles to how you would package an environment to build agents. Make sense? Everyone following along? Yeah? All right. So let's have a look at what an environment is. One, it's a boundary. Why is it a boundary? Because you want to make sure that there's a delineation between your development environment and your production environment. Why? Because you don't just want to release something to production without testing it. And it's not like in the old days when you built things in a data center that you could control and you'd build a dev environment with a dev domain controller, dev accounts, and all of those things. And then you'd have a production environment, and the dev environment never costs you any money outside of buying infrastructure. That does not translate to the cloud. Every license needs to be paid for. So if you spin up a development tenant, you'd need to license that tenant. And this is typically where we struggle as people that worry about governance is, oh, we're deving on prod. Yeah, what does that even mean, right? And that's the tricky part, because there is no delineation. Yes, you can write in custom code, it's a different conversation, but you still have to look at these things, right? Now, it's a boundary. So how do you manage components, apps, flows, access to specific components inside of building an agent in Copilot Studio? All of those governance things can be tailored and configured. You have access to these third-party MCPs or APIs in your dev environment, and it's different in your production environment. So understand how you can logically group these things from a governance perspective. And, it's important to be able to do this. And if you really want to get granular, and Jackie, I don't know if you've gone down this route where you can spin up environments. Is it safe to call it Dataverse? Should we call it Dataverse?
Kind of, but it's in a tenant. So not really Dataverse. You have Dataverse attached to an environment.
Yeah, loosely coupled, but mutually exclusive. So when you spin up an environment in Power Platform, you can give it its own Dataverse. That's more what I'm alluding to.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you give it space on Dataverse, yeah.
Someone slammed the door. So from an environment perspective, all of those components that make up the genetic makeup of what happens inside of Power Platform, Dataverse, you want to write the tables, you get all of that. Creating these, and it comes at a cost, but creating these environments, by extension, Copilot Studio components, MCPs, and all of those things, you can build some governance around that. Now, I don't know from a departmental perspective if you're really going to split it that way, but we know we've got a global customer, and when we build these solutions from a data residency, from a data governance perspective, if we deploy solutions, it lives in a specific geography. For those who don't know what multi-geo is, who knows what multi-geo is? Does it matter for people that live in South Africa? Chances are it doesn't. Okay, I'll give you a multi-geo allows you to spin up a SharePoint environment in the geography of where the user needs to participate in. We've got a customer that's global, so users that live in the US, their OneDrives, it's called a preferred data location, and any solutions that they need to consume, like a team or a SharePoint site, gets spun up in their geo. You can do similar things when we start looking at geos and all of those things. So Microsoft does recommend that you have a non-default production environment for production agents, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So let's look at the strategy around what options are available to you. And also, you want to make it as easy as possible. Depending on whether or not you live in a highly regulated organization, you may be able to get away with more if you're not highly regulated, where everything needs to go through a change control board and things like that. So business unit model, something that's easy to do. I don't know if you want to drill down to this level of granularity. It really depends on the organization. I would start with at least, and I'm not going to call it a dev branch, that's too developer focused, but I'd want to spin up a developer environment, more of a sandbox, call it a sandbox. And then if you really want to extend that to various departments inside of the organization based on a business unit model, you can do that, org related. We also just spoke about the geo, so you can have a regional model. If data sovereignty is a thing, we've seen the European Union start splitting things across. Specifically, Germany is very specific about data residency. And then you've got different regions like France and a few others. But it's mainly if you are doing stuff in the automotive industry, the European Union is now saying, well, we're happy that there's an EU geo, but we are a bit more specific for companies, German companies. They want stuff in the Germany geo. And we've got a customer that has to actually split their where do we put it? We actually put it in the UK. The EU geo is now split into multiple regions inside of the European Union because they deal with German customers in the automotive industry. And then also from a life cycle perspective, you've got these options and you need to decide. I would start with life cycle first, spin up a dev environment, and then build stuff there before you go and want to. If the governance of your organization dictates either splitting it by business or region, then go down that rabbit hole. But start with the simple stuff, right? Dev. Get a dev environment and build stuff there before your default environment. Either convert your default environment to dev and then create a new production environment, or do it the other way around. So, and why it is important to do this, because who did I speak to today? I spoke to a company this morning, and they're a group of companies actually, and they're trying to figure out how to do this across the group, because I think they've got one tenant and like 10 or 12 domains, and they all share one tenant. So there it would be a group, building out groups, well, building out environments at a business, not a business unit, a business, because there's multiple businesses inside of the organization, inside of the group. And you really want to do this so that you can manage the security guardrails across. A simple example. Let's say company A has access to, they use Workday for HR and the other company uses SAP. You don't want agents or you don't want APIs and MCPs from company A to have access to data that lives in company B and vice versa. So from a segregation perspective, you want to accurately segregate data across various data boundaries when it comes to access to specific applications. So it's all about governance. It's not really about the technical stuff, but it's really about making sure that you govern your Copilot. Well, I'm not going to say Copilot environments, but your agentic environments from a builder perspective when we talk about Copilot Studio. Because, these are the things that matter up front, and you can build 10, 15, 20 agents and you don't have your environment right. What happens when governance comes in and says you now need to change things? Are you going to redeploy all these agents that are in production but not really in production because you're still tweaking them to another environment? And just ask Jackie how difficult it is to move between solutions from a governance perspective. So when we look at what's actually required, if you are a maker, if you are being tasked and you've got a license to get into Copilot, you've got a free license. Copilot Studio is a free license. Copilot, M365 Copilot is a paid license, but they can give you access to Copilot Studio. So if you're a designated maker and you have to build agents inside a Copilot Studio specifically, understand that if you're a consulting to organizations, our recommendation is to actually say to them, make sure that your environments are spun up before you start deploying agents, because it's very difficult to apply governance principles after the fact, right? So Dataverse enabled for the environment, make sure that permission models are done correctly, either inside of the Power Platform Admin Center, inside of the M365 Admin Center, and also inside of the Entra ID Admin Center, and I'll show you why in a bit. So, from an access control perspective, it's vitally important that these things are done correctly, because when you log in, you're either going to get a good experience or you're going to get a bad experience. So when we look at these sort of a roles matrix if you are wanting, and we've seen this across a lot of organizations over the last 2 to 3 years. Security is paramount. There's two things that matter in the world today. Security, also known as zero trust, least privilege, verify explicitly, assume breach. So your IT team is going to want to give you the least amount of privileges to perform a specific function. And for those that are not in security, it might not matter today, but I can guarantee you attackers are no longer attacking human identities. They're compromising non-human identities, because that agent usually has access to some sort of service on the back end that typically will have a higher privilege than your user account. Alistair.Pugin at, yes, I have global admin rights in my tenant, but you shouldn't have any global admins in your environment at all. You should have what we call privileged identity management or privileged access management, where you elevate the privilege to perform the function, and then those permissions are removed after a predetermined amount of time. And in very much the same way, when you start looking at how roles matter inside of Microsoft 365 and Copilot Studio, you should be defining these roles as part of your governance strategy when it comes to building agents. Again, if you're a maker or you're an agent author, you need specific, and I suppose from a risk perspective, from a risk perspective, you would have more permissions in dev and less permissions in production, because as a maker, you shouldn't be responsible for publishing the solution and maintaining it in production. So you'd have a higher profile or a higher risk profile in dev and a lower risk profile. You won't be a maker in production. Also, the other roles are Power Platform admin. I still believe that nobody should have admin rights inside of your environment. They should be able to elevate their privileges to attain admin rights to perform admin functions. And then you don't end up with 900,000 different service accounts because you need to manage Power Platform with a different account, right? Gone are those days. PIM is your friend, right? The Power Platform admin would have the administrative functions to spin up new environments, should you require that. Looking at assigning specific security groups to various environments so that they can give you, the maker, access to that. And then from a governance perspective, it's not really a role inside of the environment, although there is the concept of a governance function inside of Microsoft 365, and they typically have reader rights. Platform from an observability perspective is not there yet. So you don't have a governance owner role that's going to have reader rights to the environment. And if you're not technical, don't worry about it. Or if you're not deeply technical, also don't worry about it. It is coming. It doesn't exist today. You've got governance roles in Purview and Defender. You don't have it inside of Copilot Studio yet. But from a governance guardrails perspective, it is coming. It's not on the roadmap yet, but there are conversations around it. And even though there are things that are not in Copilot from an agentic perspective, it is probably has the best security out of all the other AI providers. Microsoft, and I'm saying this because I live in the security world. It's got the best security. It's got the best governance. You're not going to get it from Anthropic. You're definitely not going to get it from them. You're not going to get it from OpenAI, and you're not going to get it from Google. And if you do get it, you're going to get a watered-down version of being able to manage agentic AI inside of a platform. So if you do have customers or you have internal stakeholders saying, yeah, but Claude Code works amazing. Look what I can do. Oh, I'm using Replit. Lovable. Amazing. I can build an app in 20 minutes. That's all good and well. But from a governance perspective, there's no observability with these things. Even if you're going to build your own stuff like OpenClaw, NemoClaw, and Hermes, and the current flavor of the week is OpenHuman. Everyone talks about governance. I mean, you don't even know what they're doing with your data, right? They tell you that we're not training our models, but do you really know? Microsoft guarantees it, and I'm not trying to sell you Microsoft. I don't use Copilot, just to let you know. I don't use Copilot for my own personal stuff. I use Claude and Perplexity because they do things better than Copilot does. I'm not saying that you shouldn't build an agent with Copilot. For my specific use case, from a research perspective, Perplexity is amazing at doing that. Copilot from a document generation, when it comes to formatting, Claude is amazing at doing that. That's why I use those two. I am building my own AI in my lab for the autonomous stuff, right? Separate conversation, separate session. All right, so let's look at tenant readiness checklist. This is why you're here. So what do you need to care about when, well, we've got a whole bunch of slides and I'm running out of time. So what do you need to do when you start thinking about building agents, or you have a customer that says, hey, we've played around with a few things. Someone in the organization has built an agent. We've built a me agent. I'm calling it a me agent, a Copilot chat agent. Agent builder agent is the official term. From a front end, someone built an agent, added some knowledge, and there are no skills or topics or any workflow attached to it. It's just doing cool stuff with a spreadsheet that I upload, right? And they want you to come build things in the environment. So the things that you need to be concerned about as a maker, I recommend you follow these processes. If you're a IT admin person, also start speaking to your makers about adhering to specific things. So the first thing, you want to make sure that you can spin up multiple environments. Go spin up a dev environment. Just go do it. Do it now, actually. If you're on this call, go create a new environment. Make sure that Dataverse is enabled. It's important. There's few things, and Jackie will be able to take you through those types of things in one of the sessions. We also need to make sure that from a data residency perspective, that is Karika sending gifts? Do I need to read this, Karika?
No, it's just saying do it. Do it. Do it.
Do it. Yes, Ben Stiller. It is vitally important that you understand, and I don't know what your geography is like. In South Africa, make sure that your Dataverse occupies space, or at least your environment occupies space in the region that you occupy space in, or in the region that you need to adhere to data sovereignty and data governance, data residency standards. Vitally important. Remember, from a Microsoft perspective, when they roll out technologies, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's available in your tenant that the content of what it's consuming lives in your tenant or lives in the data region that your tenant is in. So vitally important. I'll give you a perfect example. The OCR stuff, trying to remember the right, the way Microsoft, because they will OCR things inside of your environment. It's actually a purview tick box, right? Where if you send in an image that hasn't been OCR'd, it will perform the OCR and it will actually store the OCR PDF inside of a document library. When they launch that feature, the processing of that OCR, they also don't store the data, but it needs to be read. It extracts the text because it's optical character recognition. It then injects the text into the new PDF. The processing of that wasn't specific to a region. It used to happen outside of the region. Big data governance problem because and Microsoft had to say, we don't store your data. It's a moment in time, we take it, we upload it, and then we delete. There's a specific term for that. And then they started rolling out, well, OCRing now happens in the geo of your tenant, and from a multi-geo perspective, it'll adhere to specific things based on the user initiating or the user that uploaded the content. Well, actually, no, the region that a document library, the site is spun up in a specific region. It will actually perform that OCRing in region. So you need to make sure that whatever you're building from a Dataverse or an environment perspective actually adheres to data governance and data residency requirements of the organization, because it's not legislation. Well, it might be a legislation, it might be a regulation, it might even be a fiduciary requirement. Then also, where's my mouse? Because I moved it. Because Karika was talking. From an access model perspective, you also need to understand what your access model is. Maker, what sort of permissions they have. Vitally important. Yes, I did click somewhere else, Karika. Understand what that looks like. Make sure that you also have a life cycle. In the old days, a lot of organizations would delete things in their dev environment weekly because it's a playpen. It's not going to live there forever, right? So understand life cycles when it comes to building agents. When it gets published to production, what do you do with the agent in dev? Is it something that you need to consider? And if you do have Power Platform solutions in your environment, follow the same model. And then also, how do you go about publishing when it comes to where are these agents going to live? How are they going to be consumed? We talked last week, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the anatomy of an agent. And the first thing is, what is the user experience? Now, we know inside of Copilot Studio, you can select what channels it gets consumed in. Teams, SharePoint, Copilot chat. Those are, where do these agents get published and how do they get consumed? So straight off the bat, there's 6 quick things that you should do. Follow the order because it's important. You can do an access control straight up, or at least an access model you can build up before you spin up the environments. But if you follow this and use it as, these are the things I need to talk to, either as a maker to IT or as IT to makers, it's vitally important that you do that. Also, some other things to consider, and this is more for customers that don't have these things in their environment. You can literally go and spin up a trial. It's good for 30 days. Now, I don't know if you are consulting. I don't know what your role is. If you are consulting to an organization, when they're ready to do this, spin up a trial and you can go fiddle and do things, and that's your sandbox. But understand that it expires after 30 days. From a production perspective, you do have both options. We've spoken about production, but if a customer hasn't built any agents and they want to try before they buy, you can spin up a trial environment. But make sure you have a defined use case so that you can prove value, because it might take them 17 months to make a decision, and this thing's going to live for 30 days. Or you can convince your customer to give you an M365 Copilot license. And with an M365 Copilot license, you've got by default access to Copilot Studio unless governance guardrails are in place and they say no. And this is the scary part, because, organizations have just handed out Copilot licenses. Because all you see is end-user Copilot. Word, PowerPoint, Excel. Look how cool I can have a podcast audio recording of a document inside of my OneDrive. And that same human that's got access to that can build as many agents as they want if you don't have governance, because nobody does that. So, from a lifecycle perspective, it's also important to know what the boundaries are when you do release management. I'm not going to talk too much about this slide. I'm going to skip because we're running out of time. From a governance perspective, when you start looking at these things, there are security things, and I'm going to show you what that actually looks like in real time. Yes, there are various admin centers, and it's frustrating because they all perform different functions to govern agents inside of your environment. And that's what I really want to show you. And then from an observability perspective, it costs money to observe, also known as Agent 365. $15 per user per month if you want to manage agent from an observability perspective, or just buy an E7. All right, so admin center handoff model. Let's actually go look at the platforms, because I think it's important to understand what this looks like. I'm not going to go through all of these things. I want to show you. Let's just check what else is in here. Yeah, I'm not going to worry about that. But let's have a look at what all of these things look like inside of Microsoft 365. It's vitally important that you understand where all of these controls happen. So let me bring this across here. So the first one that everyone gravitates to is the M365 Admin Center. How many people have M365 Admin Center access on this call? Nobody. It's thumbs up. Thumbs up if you've actually lived inside of the M365 Admin Center. One person. All right. So this is not going to matter to you because chances are you're never going to get access to this. But from a management perspective, when you build agents as a maker, they show up here. So your M365 administrator can manage how agents get deployed inside of your organization. It's now become an admin function. Even the out-of-the-box agents that you get, you can manage better. However, Agent 365 comes at a license. So if you are building agents inside of your environment, this management plane is there for Microsoft built agents, and I think third-party agent store agents. But if you are creating custom or Copilot Studio agents, to manage it requires a license. There's an agent inventory and a few other things that gets managed out of here. So I think I've got one. This one I actually built this morning. There is no owner, or is there an owner? So look at the richness of, being able to manage agents. From an observability perspective, it's important. From a governance perspective, you want to manage it. You can see the users. This one I actually built as a me agent, so from a Copilot, from the agent builder, not a Copilot. Did I build it from there? No. So availability and install controls are not supported for this agent type. Also depends on the agent that you build. What it can do, so you want to know what access it has or what knowledge it has access to, the capabilities of this, and then also if there were any tools, it would be in there. Okay, let's just see what it comes up with. So there's a few things, and this is where it becomes hugely complex. So how do I observe an agent that I deployed? Number one, you can use Agent 365 to manage the observability, to understand what it's doing, the interactions and all of those things. If you want to manage the permissions, because every agent that you create in Microsoft 365 gets an application registration because it needs to perform functions inside of Graph. Where does that get managed from? Right? Not inside of Agent 365. You can see when I click on, this one doesn't have an Entra ID, and that's just bad. That's bad English. You get Entra Agent ID, which I'm going to show you as well. And this is where, it becomes very confusing, and it's not going to matter to people that don't have admin access or governance people, right? Understand that there's an entire security play behind this. It's not just as simple as I'm going to build an agent. As a maker, I understand these things, right? And also from a licensing perspective, it costs more money to manage these things better. From a permission, this one doesn't have any permissions inside of Entra from a graph access control perspective, but we'll talk about that in a bit. And then activity, I don't think this, well, yeah. So there was what? There was one thing done today. This is a brand new agent. There was one session, one active user, and the agent runtime. So this is one place where you actually manage agents, right? Well, after you've deployed it, it gets managed here. To manage environments, it's actually done through the Power Platform Admin Center. Now, we're going to look at 5 different admin centers that impact agents. And that's a crazy part. So if I'm in Copilot Studio, you'll notice on the top right-hand corner here, we talk about environments, right? There's the default environment. This one was spun up by my tenant like 10 years ago. 10 years ago, entirely possible, maybe even earlier. You'll notice that I've got other supported environments, and you can actually see that the data platform on the back of that is Dataverse. This is the default environment. You'll see that's got the environment type as developer, and that one is a production environment for Microsoft 365. So in order to add additional environments, you would have to go into the Power Platform Admin Center and actually configure additional environments. So spinning up environments happen here. Doesn't happen in Copilot. It doesn't happen in the M365 Admin Center because it's still governed by Power Platform, right? There's a whole bunch of other things in here. There you can see. You can also activate managed environments, and Jackie will spend the next 3 days ranting on about, that's not what I wanted to do, about what a managed environment actually entails. And I'm not going to give a PTSD when we talk about that. So spinning up environments happen inside of Power Platform Admin Center. Governing agents happen inside of the M365 Admin Center. Managing what these agents have access to from an API perspective happens in Azure. Well, Entra ID anyway. This is Entra ID. You'll see a new blade here called agent identities. And typically, if you don't have licenses for these things, none of this is going to work. Well, you can build things and it's going to run, but there's no observability. So when you look at Microsoft E7 license, it includes Agent 365 and the Entra suite. And I think Agent 365 includes Entra Agent ID. And it's nothing to be worried about today, but understand that when you start building out, if you've got an organization that's got 50, 60 agents performing functions, which is not impossible, you want, from an IT governance perspective, observability to what these agents do, how they function, what their performance is like, and most importantly, what they have access to. And unfortunately, it comes at an additional cost. When you start managing agents from an agent identity perspective. Because every agent, now it's going to sound foreign. Where did I want to go? Into ID, and I want to go into, might be here. Just want to check, what did I call that agent? Copilot, did I create that today? Security doc. Well, let's just go look for that one. Not sure if it comes up here. No. See if it'll come up here. I can actually see the agents that I've actually built using Copilot Studio inside of their agents blade inside of, let's just select this one. And this is also in preview. Now you can actually, it has an agent identity, and you can go look at what it actually does. Now, from a governance perspective, your identity people are going to lose their shit when it comes to, oh, you built 50 agents. None of these things are going to be working because, well, none of these, we're not going to allow anything to work because we're switching it off. So understand all of these things that you're doing requires some sort of management, because it lives in multiple admin centers. That's all zoomed in. And that's why this slide is important, right? Because it's either a Power Platform administrator's problem, an M365 administrator's problem, or an identity and access manager administrator's problem. Or it might even become a governance problem, because I can go get data out of data security posture management for AI, which lives in the Purview admin center. And then you also have 2 additional admin centers that's for observability from a governance perspective for C-levels. And there's a new admin center that dropped in the last day that also gives you a view into agents. And we can talk about that at a later stage. So understand how all of these things, makers, M365 administrators, Power Platform admins, and how they all come together to give you an overall experience. So from an IT perspective, as a maker, these are the things that you need to ask IT, and then ask IT for, and you're going to have to confirm what IT needs to ask makers, like what data and connectors the agent's will use, because they need to, in a controlled environment, manage all of these things. Right now, it's just a wild, wild west. It's open to everyone. So some things to avoid, because we're running closer to time, and I want to demo a few other things. The first thing is building everything in default. Right now, go spin up a dev environment, or go to the Power Platform admin and say, hey, can I have a dev environment with Dataverse enabled in the region that I want to build these agents in? Go do that now. First thing, remember we had that checklist. Go do that now, right? And also understanding the difference between building everything in default. I've spoken about spinning up a trial, and the customer's demoing it and they don't realize that the trial expires. And then the big thing is overprivileged makers, where you've got keys to all, you've got keys to all the doors in your kingdom. That shouldn't happen. Now, as a maker, you want this, right? As a governance person myself, I will never give you controls unless you specifically tell me unequivocally, and you've given me a really long, detailed document about what this agent needs to do before I give you permissions. Because we practice least privilege. That's by design. You know, in South Africa, because there's a couple of people that are not in South Africa, if you live in Joburg, chances are you've got security cameras and electrified fencing around your house. That's just it's a default, that's a way of life. It's the same when it comes to security for things that live inside of your Microsoft 365 environment. Least privilege is a way of life. Has to be. Otherwise, these things get out of control, and someone's going to compromise your account into your environment because you clicked on a funny link, and Ninja Dust, they in with your credentials, and they're doing things because you've got admin rights to specific things. All right, so why do we care about all of these things? Because if you put the guardrails and the specific practices in place today, it makes it easier for you to A, build an agent, B, configure an agent with the right security boundaries, C, also release an agent to production, and D, feel good about your life because you've done it the right way around. Nobody's going to come 3 weeks down the line. We've seen all these people that go on YouTube and things that say, I've built an app in a day, and now I'm making $5,979 a day off this application. And 2 weeks later, the application gets hacked because there are no guardrails. From an IT perspective, forget the Google search appliance debacle of 2007. This is the worst IT product from a governance perspective that's ever been released. And I'm talking about AI. Go look at how much people are complaining. Oh, someone stole my data. Oh, I gave my data to AI. Understand that this is it. I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional about these things, but you need the right. You won't just randomly deploy an application in your environment. It goes through specific checklists. It goes to the steering committee. It goes to the budget committee. It then goes to the IT committee, and then goes to the governance committee before that application is deployed inside of your organization. Think of agents as applications that you're building. And these security guardrails need to be applied to that. So again, simple stuff. Dev test, you may not want to test, just have a dev and a production environment, split it across those 2 rooms, not 3 rooms. It's easier to manage because, you know, another environment becomes a massive overhead to govern, because whatever you configure from a security guardrails perspective in dev needs to extend to production. It needs to be more concise in production. And you don't necessarily want those guardrails to be repeated with some sort of limitation for test as well. Make sure that you do that. Also, we've spoken about the admin centers that manage various things. What happens in the M365 admin center? What happens in the Power Platform admin center? Not that Copilot Studio has an admin center, but there are other admin centers that you need to worry about and how it gets governed from an observability perspective. And then also from a rollout perspective, specific things that we recommend you do when building out these environments, right? So what's required and what's recommended, I'm not going to take you through too many of these things. Again, well, I don't know. You know, you need to run workshops for these to collate this data. It's not something that you can just randomly spin up, and it doesn't get done in a day if it's going to be done correctly. So and each of these points is a longer conversation, like being able to have a conversation with your security team around how you want to do privileged identity management. Maybe create a security group called Copilot Studio Makers, and then have your account associated from a PIM perspective so that you actually have these permissions when you need to perform, when you want to build an agent, and not have these permissions long-term. Vitally important, right? And then also, you know, just from a governance perspective, how do you manage these licenses? Now, remember, I think we spoke about it last week, and I often get asked this question. Yes, you can build agents that are consumed by users that don't have Copilot license. It comes with a message capacity license, and you can build agents that can be consumed by users who don't have an M365 Copilot license. It's not my recommendation that you do that. If you really want to, if you're a stickler about, building or signing a Copilot license to a user, you can switch on a pay-as-you-go, and then you can test agents from a consumption perspective, and you'll pay a couple of cents per message. Because to buy a message capacity license, it's $200 for 25,000 messages. So it really depends on the modality. You can spin up a trial and build stuff there. You can use pay-as-you-go before you assign a Copilot license to a user to see if those users are just going to consume an agent or do they actually need a Copilot license. It's neither here nor there. My recommendation is spend the money. Buy the Copilot license, because it's not just about the agents. It's about the entire ecosystem. Understand what a user gets for that $30 per user per month. They not only get all the cool stuff that Microsoft has been trying to sell you for the last 2-3 years, they get access to any agent, and they get unlimited use of those agents. I'm saying unlimited because we haven't tested the upper limit of how many agents a user can consume with a Copilot license, or how many iterations or interactions with said agent. I can say that with a pay-as-you-go and a message capacity license, for every $200, it's 25,000 messages. One prompt doesn't equal one message. Depends on the complexity of the prompt. So it's kind of, you never know. Rather just give them the license. And maybe Microsoft has subliminally positioned it that way because this is the one that they want you to buy. Buy the Copilot Studio license. And if you're really pedantic about all of this, you're going to have to buy an Agent 365 license as well. So it's no longer just $30 per user. It actually works out to $45 per user. And then you may as well buy an E7. So if agentic AI is part of your strategy, you have to have the licensing conversation with the customer. Or if you are the customer, you're going to have the licensing conversation with the organization. Regions, we spoke about data location, unsupported regions. We've covered this already. From a residency perspective, you need to understand what that looks like. From a roles for publishing, and this is the other part, you can build an agent, but it doesn't mean that it's automatically going to show up for consumption. Again, admin center handoff. You build an agent and it needs to deploy or publish to specific users. You actually need to go do that as an M365 admin center inside of the Copilot control system, Copilot plus agents. From a deployment perspective, someone with those rights need to say, hey, here's a group that I'm creating for HR. There's 10 users in this group and we're publishing. Well, you can publish an agent to an individual person. You'll never do that from a governance. No governance controls are going to say, oh, it's okay, you can publish it to people. No, you're going to want to manage it from a group perspective. Also, from a group perspective, it impacts the way you manage identities. We like group-based publishing, not individual user publishing, because if that user leaves, it's more role-based type things. HR is a function inside of the organization. A 40K token chat, what is that, Reichardt? Is it Reichardt?
After 40, you can only use 40K worth of tokens per chat. You've hit the ceiling.
When you say K, are you talking about 40,000 tokens generated from a 40K token? That's a token count?
Yeah, 40,000 generated tokens, then you've hit the limit.
What limit? A daily use, a monthly use, an hourly
the
use?
Chat. Then you can't continue with the chat. You need to start
from a context window perspective.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is pretty
All
small.
right. Yeah, if you're building complex agents, if it's a task agent or an autonomous agent versus a retrieval agent, this is the other thing, and it's a great point to raise. And you saying there's a context window limitation for Copilot agents, which is 40,000. Right? So understand what a context window is. Think of a context window as a character window, not a character as I'm a role player. I'm a Harry Potter in role playing. No, think of the characters that you use in a prompt. So, Reichardt, are you saying that the upper limit for a full loop of an agent performing a function before it starts losing its mind is 40,000 characters?
No, with the license, your input-output total can only go up to 40,000. After that point, you need to summarize the chat and create a new chat to continue.
Okay, so there is a continuation loop, like if you run out of tokens inside of Claude and all the other ones, right? But it's still based on the context window for that chat instantiation.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, perfect. But that doesn't, so there's another limit here. It's not just how many times you can talk to that agent, it's how many times you talk to that agent in that chat conversation. It depends on how much heavy lifting that agent's actually going to perform. So I'll give you a perfect example. Building these slides, I hit my limit inside of Claude because and it depends on how complex the agent is, right? If you've got skill and you've got API calls or you're doing scraping somewhere, it really depends on the complexity of the agent. 40,000 is small if that agent is thinking and performing functions and having a conversation with itself, for lack of a better term, right? So now it's thinking, it's generating an outcome, it then rationalizes the outcome, and then it says to you, hey, do you want me to continue? And you say yes, and then you tell it and you give it more things. That context window for that chat instantiation that's not small when you're building complex agents. Well, it is small when you're building complex agent from a chat inference perspective. Input output, like Regot said, which is great. It's a great reference. But understand what that all means when it comes to the upper limits of the functionality when it comes to these things. It's interesting, 40,000, right?
They might have pushed it up to 64 at this point with the newer models, but last time
So are you saying that's a model context window problem?
It might be connected to the model that gets essentially made available to the tenant, but yeah,
we don't
context.
Yeah, I don't know where those stats are where you can actually see what model, because if it's a 40K, there is a calculator that you can use on the back end because, with various models, you get billions of parameters associated with the model, and the larger the parameters are of the model, the more RAM it uses. Simple math, well, VRAM anyway. So there's so many technical things just looking at a language model. There's quantized stuff and the amount of bits that the model has. And what they're doing now is, who was doing it recently? I'm trying to remember, where if you look at a platform like OpenHuman, so, build your own AI, or at least from an agentic building agents, right? Everyone talks about agents, right? And we're going to use Claude, and I'm going to have my own personal agent. This is context window, not open, Hermes. In order to run Hermes locally from a language model perspective, you need a 64K context window. That requires, to run the smallest language model that allows for a 64K context window, I think you need 32 gigs of RAM, VRAM anyway. So if you're going to buy a MacBook or an M4 Mac Mini, well, it's going to be an M4 Mini Pro with at least 32 gigs of RAM to run that language model from a context window perspective. So this looks more like the models that they're using would use it's like a 24 gig context window, for lack of a better term, because the larger the context window, the larger the model. No, the larger the model, the larger the context window required to get the most out of that before this thing falls over. But from an agentic loop perspective, if you can continue it in a different chat, it's just overly complex, and it's not something that as a maker you need to worry about. But understand, if it does start falling over, there are upper limits of the boundaries of generating tokens or chunking. With platforms like OpenHuman, it strips out irrelevant text before it actually passes the request because everything's an agent, to the agent. So understand what you need to do from it. So just to recap, Copilot Studio and the best possible way to build out these things, make sure that You cover the readiness checklist from a governance perspective, roles, residency, environments, dev test, all of those things. Make sure that these things run in the same environments as your tenant. Also important, make sure that the supported region is selected. Make sure that database is enabled during that environment creation. Otherwise, it's not going to be too lacquer for you. Speak to your IT team, speak to your security team, and speak to your identity team before spinning up the environment. They might have specific requirements. Have a look at licensing from an observability perspective. It's vitally important. Agent 365, Entra ID, Entra Agent ID, the stuff that you get out of Purview from a data security posture management for AI. You want to make sure that you can manage the agents that get deployed. And that is directly proportional to the type of security guardrails that you put in place. Some other things also, make sure that there is an owner from a business perspective. So accountability is prime. Just because you built an agent, right, doesn't mean that you own the agent. In very much the same way that we used to build workflows in Power Platform, Karika logs in with her account and she builds a workflow. Doesn't mean she's the business owner. Also, from a technical owner perspective, you need to understand what that, as a maker, you might build it, but you'll never own it, technically or at a business level. So it's vitally important that you manage that, right? Also, when you are building future growth things, because you're building this environment for the organization, how do you do onboarding of business requests for? We had a customer today where the proposal management team wanted an agent. We didn't have a request form for them to say, this is the business case. A different customer we spoke to earlier on this morning is now starting to define the business cases for agentic AI. And they're bringing that to IT, and now IT have to come up with a governance model for agents inside of the organization. And this will all apply to everything, that if you want to build an agent, these are the things that you need to do. Security guardrails around, if I've got a dev environment and a maker wants to build an agent, I'm going to close off everything by default, and then they're going to have to justify why I'm going to give them access to MCPs or APIs or any third-party connectors that it's going to want to use. And also from a knowledge perspective, is the maker going to have access to document libraries inside of SharePoint that they shouldn't have access to? So understand that there's a lot that needs to happen before you just randomly go into Copilot Studio and build an agent. Because as a maker, you're going to request access to things that not you necessarily shouldn't have access to, but IT is going to say, why do you need access to it? So a lot of thought needs to go into building agents inside of your organization before you just randomly go do that. And I guarantee you, nobody's looked at the technical considerations around providing a secure platform for building Copilot Studio agents. There is no customer out there that I think has done this. And I'll happily be convinced otherwise. And that's it really from me. I mean, we started this journey saying what the anatomy of an agent looks like in season 2, episode 1, what this world needs to look like. Like we did in season 1, where we said, well, you should go through some sort of technical readiness program before you start handing out Copilot licenses. This is just an extension of that. It's literally an extension of that. First, we thought, well, oversharing and data security is a thing where, all of a sudden we need to care about what we exposing users to, because if they can search and they can find content, that's how the chat experience is going to work, how they want to surface data. This is the same thing. It just, you're now building either a retrieval agent, a task agent, or an autonomous agent. And, when you start building autonomous agents, you don't want it to have access to everything in your environment. Because the security guardrails, it should still apply, because it's going to use the security trimming or the access control list that the user has when performing agentic functions. But know that when you're building agents, sometimes you may be able to override things. Lots of things to think about. Any questions, concerns, comments as to what you've seen today?